"Ma'am, step out of the vehicle now." The words cut through the open highway like a siren, sharp and final. And for a moment, even the wind seemed to hold its breath as Danielle Carter rested her hands on the worn leather of the steering wheel, her 18-wheeler idling low beneath her like a living thing. Diesel rumbling steady and calm, the way it always did when everything else wasn't. Red and blue lights painted the chrome mirrors and pulses, washing over her dark skin in flashes of cold color, reflecting in the glass like a warning she had seen before, too many times, in too many places, and yet her face didn't change. Not a flicker, not a flinch, just a slow inhale that lifted her shoulders half an inch before settling again. Outside, boots crunched against gravel, deliberate, confident, the kind of walk that came from believing you owned the space you stood in, and she could hear the faint crackle of a radio clipped to a uniform, voices overlapping somewhere in static she didn't need to understand to recognize. The tone, control, assumption, decision already made. Danielle reached for the door handle, but didn't open it yet, her eyes moving once across the side mirror, scanning without seeming to, counting angles, distances, exits, the habit so deeply wired it felt less like thinking and more like breathing. And when she finally pushed the door open, the metal hinge groaned softly, the sound oddly loud in the stillness as her boots hit the asphalt, solid, grounded, unmoving. License and registration. The officer said, not asking, just stating, his hand resting near his belt as if it belonged there, as if everything about this moment was routine, ordinary, unquestioned. But Danielle didn't reach for anything yet, her hands staying visible, relaxed at her sides, palms open to the air, her voice quiet when it came, steady enough to feel almost out of place. "Can you tell me why I was stopped, officer?" The question hung there, simple, reasonable, and for half a second the man in front of her hesitated, just a shift of weight, a glance that flickered and vanished, before the edge returned to his tone, sharper now. "You don't ask the questions here." And somewhere behind him another cruiser door shut, another presence joining the scene, multiplying the pressure without a word. Danielle nodded once, slow, as if acknowledging something deeper than the sentence itself, and the smell of hot asphalt rose under the midday sun, mixing with diesel and dust, grounding her in a place that felt both familiar and wrong, because she knew this script, knew how it played out, knew the way silence could be mistaken for weakness and calm mistaken for compliance. But still she didn't move, didn't rush, didn't break the rhythm she had set inside herself. Her heartbeat steady, measured, controlled, like a clock no one else could hear. "Step to the side of the truck," the officer added, gesturing with two fingers like he was directing traffic, and Danielle obeyed without argument, stepping exactly where he pointed, boots landing heel to toe with quiet precision, her gaze lifting once to meet his. Not challenging, not submissive, just present, aware, and in. That brief second something almost imperceptible passed between them, something he didn't quite understand, something that didn't fit the version of her he had already decided on. The wind picked up again, tugging lightly at her jacket, carrying the distant hum of passing cars that didn't slow down, didn't stop, didn't see, and Danielle exhaled slowly, her eyes lowering just enough to hide the sharpness behind them as the flashing lights continued to pulse across the side of the truck. Red, blue, like a heartbeat out of sync with her own. And beneath it all, quiet and buried, there was a stillness inside her that didn't belong to this roadside, didn't belong to this moment, a stillness that waited, watched, and counted every move. The younger officer shifted first, not much, just a subtle repositioning of his boots against the gravel. But Danielle noticed it the same way she noticed everything, the slight tightening in his jaw, the way his hand hovered uncertainly near his radio before settling again. And she knew without looking directly that he was watching her differently now, not with the same easy confidence as before, but with a question he had not yet formed into words. The senior officer, Cole, did not share that hesitation, his posture still rigid, shoulders squared as if the road itself belonged to him. And when he stepped closer, the space between them shrank to something deliberate, something meant to assert, to press, to define the roles he had already assigned. "Turn around," he said, voice flat, controlled, and Danielle complied without delay, pivoting smoothly, her movements unhurried, her hands still visible as she faced the long stretch of her truck's side panel, the metal reflecting distorted flashes of red and blue that slid across her vision like moving shadows. The heat from the engine rose in waves, carrying the smell of oil and road dust, and for a moment the world narrowed to small details. The faint vibration under her boots, the distant hum of traffic passing at 70 miles per hour, the soft click of a pen against a notepad somewhere behind her, each sound landing with clarity against the quiet she held inside herself. "You hauling anything illegal today?" Cole asked, the question casual on the surface but edged with something sharper underneath, and Danielle let the silence stretch for half a breath before answering, her tone even, almost conversational. "Everything in that trailer is documented and logged, same as every mile I drive," she said, and she could feel his eyes on her back, measuring, testing, searching for a crack that was not there. Another cruiser door opened, slower this time, and a third officer stepped into the scene, older, heavier, his presence less aggressive but no less observant, his gaze moving between Danielle and Cole with a quiet calculation that did not need words to communicate itself. "We are going to take a look inside," Cole continued, already moving toward the rear of the truck as if the decision had been made long before he spoke it aloud, and Danielle turned her head slightly, not enough to challenge, just enough to be heard. "Do you have a warrant for that?" The words landed clean, precise, and for the first time there was a pause that lingered longer than a second, a shift in the air that felt like something invisible tightening. The younger officer glanced toward Cole, then back at Danielle, his expression flickering with uncertainty before he masked it again, and Cole exhaled through his nose, a quiet sound that carried more irritation than effort. "We do not need one," he said, dismissing the question as if it were irrelevant, and he kept walking, boots striking the pavement with measured intent. Danielle did not follow him with her body, only with her awareness, her eyes lowering again as she adjusted her stance by an inch, aligning herself with the angle of the truck, the sun, the officers, small movements that looked like nothing but meant everything. And when she spoke again, her voice dropped slightly, softer, but no less steady. "You are crossing a line you cannot step back from," she said, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact, and the words seemed to settle into the space around them, heavier than their volume suggested. Behind her, metal clanged as one of the officers reached the trailer latch, the sound echoing sharper than it should have in the open air, and Danielle closed her eyes for a brief second, not in frustration, not in fear, but in calculation, her breathing slow, controlled, the kind of breath that held tension without letting it rise. And when she opened them again, her gaze lifted just enough to catch the reflection of the body camera mounted on Cole's chest, the small blinking light that confirmed what she already knew. Every word, every movement, every decision being recorded in a way that would outlast this moment. The wind shifted direction, carrying a low whistle across the highway, and for a second everything felt suspended, like the space between two heartbeats, and Danielle spoke again, quieter now, almost to herself but loud enough to carry. "You might want to think about what comes next." And this time the younger officer did not hide his reaction, his head turning slightly, his eyes narrowing as if he was trying to place something he could not quite identify, while Cole, already at the back of the truck, did not turn around, did not answer, did not slow, and that choice, more than anything he had said, told Danielle exactly how far this would go before it turned. She shifted her weight again, grounding herself, feeling the rough texture of the asphalt through the soles of her boots, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat aligning with something deeper, something practiced, something patient, and as the latch clicked open behind her, sharp and final, she did not move, did not speak again. She simply stood there, still as the road itself, waiting. The latch released with a hollow metallic snap that echoed longer than it should have, the kind of sound that lingered in the air like a decision already made, and Danielle did not turn right away. She let the moment stretch, let the weight of that single action settle across the open stretch of highway, because she understood something the men behind her did not, that certain lines once crossed did not fade quietly. They stayed, recorded, repeated, examined under lights far brighter than the ones flashing now. The younger officer stepped closer to the trailer, his boots slower this time, less certain, his gaze flicking from the open latch to Danielle's still figure, then to Cole, who stood with his hand resting against the metal door as if claiming it, as if the authority he carried could justify what had already begun. And for a brief second the older officer shifted again, clearing his throat softly, not speaking. But the hesitation was there, subtle, almost invisible, and Danielle caught it without looking. The way she caught everything. The way she always had. The wind pushed harder now, sliding along the length of the truck, rattling loose dust against the pavement. And somewhere far down the highway a horn sounded, distant, indifferent, the world continuing without pause while this moment narrowed tighter around the three of them. "Open it," Cole said, not loud, but final. And the younger officer reached for the handle, his fingers brushing the cold metal. Before stopping, just for a fraction of a second, long enough for doubt to exist, long enough for Danielle to speak again, her voice calm, almost level with the wind. "You still have time to step back," she said. And this time it was not just a statement. It carried something else beneath it, something measured. Something that did not belong to a roadside conversation, but to a place where consequences were not optional. Cole exhaled, a short sound, more annoyance than thought, and nodded once. And the door began to swing open, slow at first, the hinges creaking under the weight, revealing the dark interior of the trailer inch by inch, shadows stretching outward into the daylight. And Danielle finally turned her head just enough to catch the reflection of the movement in the chrome side mirror, her eyes narrowing slightly as she tracked the angle, the spacing, the positions of every person within reach, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged. The younger officer stepped back as the door opened fully, his gaze moving inside, scanning the rows of secured cargo, pallets wrapped tight, labels aligned, everything exactly where it should be, nothing out of place, nothing illegal, nothing that justified what had already been done. And the silence that followed felt different now, heavier, like something had shifted that could not be undone. Cole stepped closer, peering inside as if searching for something that was not there, something that would validate the path he had chosen. And when he found nothing, his jaw tightened just enough to show it. A small crack in the certainty he had carried a minute before. Behind Danielle, the older officer finally spoke, his voice lower, more controlled. "Everything looks standard," he said. Not accusing, not defensive, just stating what was in front of him. And for the first time Cole did not answer immediately, his eyes still fixed on the trailer as if it might change if he stared long enough. Danielle shifted her weight again, a small adjustment that aligned her shoulders square with the road. And when she spoke this time her tone dropped further, quieter but sharper. "You have already made your call," she said, and the words landed with a clarity that cut through the air. "Now you have to live with it." And the younger officer looked at her fully, then really looked, as if seeing her for the first time, not just a driver, not just a stop on a highway, but something else he could not yet name, something that did not fit into the frame he had been given. The body camera light blinked steadily, capturing everything, the open trailer, the empty justification, the silence that followed, and Danielle let her gaze settle on it for a brief second, not obvious, not pointed, just enough to acknowledge its presence, enough to remind anyone paying attention that this moment did not belong only to the road anymore. Cole finally stepped back from the trailer, his shoulders stiff, his expression controlled but thinner now, stretched over something less certain, and he turned halfway toward Danielle, not fully, not yet, as if still deciding how to respond, how to regain ground that had already shifted beneath him. The wind died down just slightly, leaving behind a quieter space, a pause that felt like the edge of something larger, and Danielle stood there, still, composed, her hands relaxed at her sides, her eyes steady, waiting not for permission, not for resolution, but for the moment when the weight of what had been done would finally catch up to the people who had done it. The silence did not break all at once, it thinned slowly, like tension leaking out of a sealed room. And Cole shifted his stance as if the ground beneath him had changed in a way he could not fully explain, his hand dropping from the edge of the trailer door, fingers brushing once against the metal before pulling back. And for the first time since the lights came on behind her truck, there was a pause in him that was not controlled, not deliberate, just there, exposed in the space between decisions. Danielle watched it without staring, her gaze steady but not confrontational, the kind of attention that did not demand anything yet missed nothing. And when she spoke again, her voice carried the same calm weight it had from the start. You searched without cause, opened a sealed load, and documented it on your own camera, she said. Each word placed carefully, not rushed, not emphasized, just aligned. And the younger officer's head turned sharply toward Cole, the meaning settling in. Faster for him than for the man who had made the call. The older officer stepped forward half a pace, not enough to take control, but enough to be part of the moment. His eyes moving from Danielle to the open trailer and back again, his voice lower now, almost measured. We can close it up and move on, he offered, and it was not a command. It was a suggestion, a door left open that had not existed seconds earlier. Cole did not answer right away, his jaw tightening, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to reclaim something that had already slipped. And the flashing lights reflected across his uniform in uneven pulses, red and blue sliding over. His expression like signals he could not turn off. Danielle let the silence stretch again, letting them sit inside it, because she understood the moment had shifted from action to consequence. And those were never the same thing. The wind eased, the air settling heavier, and somewhere behind them a car slowed briefly before continuing on, the driver choosing distance over involvement, leaving the scene contained, isolated, recorded. Danielle tilted her head just slightly, her eyes flicking once more to the small blinking light on Cole's chest, then back to his face. And there was something almost reflective in her tone when she spoke next. This is not about me anymore, she said, and that line landed differently, not as a challenge, but as a reality, something larger than the roadside, larger than any one decision made in heat or habit. The younger officer swallowed, his hand finally lifting to his radio before stopping midway, unsure whether to speak, unsure what he would say if he did. And that hesitation echoed louder than any command. Cole exhaled slowly, longer this time, the sound carrying a weight that had not been there before, and he looked toward the trailer again, then back at Danielle, and for a brief second something unguarded flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not exactly, but recognition, the kind that comes too late to change what has already been done. Close it, he said finally, his voice tighter, more contained, and the younger officer moved quickly, almost relieved to have direction, stepping forward to pull the trailer door back into place, the hinges groaning again as the metal swung shut, sealing the space as if that could undo the moment that had already been captured. The latch clicked, softer this time, less final, and the older officer nodded once, a small acknowledgement that did not need explanation. Danielle shifted her stance again, grounding herself, the tension in her shoulders releasing by a fraction, not fully, not yet, and when she spoke her voice remained even, steady as before. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? The question was simple, direct, and it cut through everything that had come before it, leaving no room for interpretation. Cole hesitated, just long enough for the younger officer to glance at him again, just long enough for the weight of the situation to press in, and then he stepped back half a pace, clearing the space between them without saying the words outright. Danielle watched him, reading the answer before it was spoken, and she gave a small nod, not in approval, not in gratitude, but in acknowledgement. And she turned toward the cab of her truck, her movements the same as before, controlled, unhurried, each step placed with quiet precision. As she reached the door, her hand resting briefly on the handle, she paused for a fraction of a second, her gaze lifting to the horizon where the highway stretched endless and indifferent, and then she pulled herself up into the cab, the door closing behind her with a solid, grounded sound that cut clean through the fading pulse of the lights. Inside, the engine's low rumble filled the space again, familiar, steady, and Danielle placed her hands on the wheel, her reflection faint in the glass, her expression unchanged, but something beneath it had shifted, something quieter, deeper, and as the truck eased forward, rolling back onto the open road, the flashing lights remained behind her, still blinking, still present, but no longer in control of where she was going. The highway swallowed the sound of the cruiser lights as Danielle merged back into the flow of traffic, the long hood of her truck cutting through open space with a steady, grounded force that felt almost too calm after what had just unfolded. And for several miles she said nothing, did nothing beyond guiding the wheel with small, precise adjustments, her eyes fixed forward as the white lines slipped beneath her tires in a rhythm that matched the low hum of the engine. Inside the cab, the air carried the faint scent of coffee gone cold and worn leather, familiar, controlled, a space that belonged entirely to her. And yet the echo of flashing lights still lingered somewhere behind her eyes, not as fear, not as anger, but as something sharper, something unresolved. She reached up once, adjusting the rearview mirror by a fraction, catching a brief glimpse of empty road stretching back for miles, no lights, no sirens, nothing but distance. And still her gaze held there for a second longer than necessary, measuring, confirming, letting the moment settle into something real. The radio on the dash crackled faintly, a burst of static followed by a distant voice that faded before forming words, and Danielle did not touch it, did not reach for anything. She simply breathed, slow and steady, letting the rhythm of the road pull her back into focus. But the stillness did not last long, because she knew what they did not, that moments like that did not end when the vehicles separated. They traveled, they carried forward, they reached places unseen, and the small blinking camera she had noticed earlier was not just a witness. It was a path, a thread that would lead somewhere beyond that roadside. Her fingers tapped once lightly against the steering wheel, a habit more than a thought, and then she reached toward the console, pulling open a narrow compartment where a thin black folder rested, worn at the edges but carefully kept, and she did not open it right away. She only let her hand rest there for a second, feeling the texture, grounding herself in something that existed long before this day and would exist long after. The truck rolled past a mile marker, the number flashing by in green and white, and Danielle finally opened the folder, flipping it just enough to reveal a laminated card tucked inside, its surface catching a sliver of sunlight that slipped through the windshield. And she did not take it out, did not need to. She only looked at it for a brief second before closing the folder again, sliding it back into place with the same quiet precision. The road curved slightly ahead, a gentle bend that shifted the angle of light across the dashboard, and she adjusted her grip on the wheel, her shoulders relaxing by another inch, the tension unwinding in layers rather than all at once, because she understood that control was not about force, it was about timing, about knowing when to act and when to let things unfold. Behind her, miles away now, the officers would still be standing on that stretch of asphalt, still processing what had happened, still deciding what it meant, and Danielle knew that part would take longer, not because the facts were unclear, but because the truth had a way of settling slowly into places that resisted it. The radio crackled again, clearer this time, and a dispatcher's voice broke through in fragments, coordinates, units, routine calls that had nothing to do with her. And yet she listened for a second before reaching over and turning the volume down, not off, just enough to fade it into the background, because she preferred the quiet, the kind that allowed her to think without interruption. Another mile marker passed, then another, the numbers counting forward without pause, and Danielle let out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding, her eyes steady, her posture unchanged, but something beneath it all had shifted into alignment, something deeper than the moment on the roadside. She lifted her hand once more, brushing lightly against the edge of the steering wheel, and for a brief second her fingers stilled, as if marking the exact point where reaction ended and intention began, and then she continued driving, the truck moving forward with the same quiet authority it always had, carrying her away from flashing lights, away from assumptions, away from a moment that had already begun to echo far beyond where it started. And as the horizon stretched out ahead of her, endless and unbroken, Danielle Carter did not look back again. The sun had shifted lower by the time the highway opened into a long, empty stretch, the light turning warmer, softer, casting long shadows across the dashboard as Danielle kept her eyes fixed ahead, her hands steady on the wheel. The rhythm of the engine settling into something almost meditative, but her mind was not drifting. It was working quietly, precisely, retracing every second of what had happened, not with emotion, but with clarity. She reached toward the console again, this time pulling out her phone, the screen lighting up in her hand, reflecting briefly in her eyes before she placed it in the mounted holder near the dash. And for a moment she did not touch it. She only watched the screen as if measuring the timing, the sequence, the next step, because to her, this was not an ending. It was a beginning of something that required patience, not reaction. Her thumb moved once, unlocking the screen, and she opened a simple recording app, the interface plain, functional, no distractions, and she spoke into it without hesitation, her voice calm, steady, each word placed with intention. Date, time, mile marker approximately 183 on Interstate 40. 3 officers initiated a stop without stated cause, conducted a search without warrant, body camera active. She paused briefly, not to think, but to breathe, then continued. No resistance offered, verbal warning issued prior to search. And she stopped the recording just as cleanly as she had started it, saving it with a quick motion before setting the phone back into place. The act itself was simple, almost routine, but the weight behind it was not. And as she drove, the significance of it settled quietly into the space around her, because she understood documentation was not about emotion. It was about memory that could not be altered. The road dipped slightly ahead, a gradual descent that shifted the angle of the horizon, and Danielle adjusted her speed by a few miles per hour, her foot light on the pedal, the truck responding smoothly, predictably, everything within her control again, and yet her awareness remained sharp, tuned to more than just the lane lines and traffic patterns. Her eyes flicked once to the side mirror, then to the rear, then forward again, a sequence so natural it barely registered as movement, but it confirmed what she already knew, that she was alone on this stretch, at least for now. The radio crackled again, louder this time, and she reached over to raise the volume just enough to catch the transmission. A dispatcher calling out a routine check, a unit responding with a clipped acknowledgement, voices layered with urgency that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the system she had just brushed against. And Danielle listened for a moment longer than necessary before lowering the volume again, her expression unchanged. Her hand moved once more to the console, pulling the black folder back into her lap, and this time she opened it fully, revealing not just the laminated card but a series of documents beneath it, neatly arranged, edges aligned, each page a piece of a larger picture, and she flipped through them slowly, not searching, just confirming, her fingers brushing lightly against the paper as if grounding herself in the reality of it. The truck continued forward, mile after mile slipping past, the numbers on the roadside markers counting upward in steady progression, and Danielle closed the folder again, placing it back with the same care as before, because she did not need to look any longer. She already knew what was there. The light outside softened further, the sky beginning to shift toward evening tones, and the road ahead stretched wide and open, carrying her forward into distance that felt both familiar and uncertain, because while the moment behind her had ended, its impact had not. It had only begun to move, to spread, to reach places she could not yet see. She adjusted her grip on the wheel once more, her fingers settling into a position that felt instinctive, practiced, and she let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing slightly as the tension continued to unwind in layers, not disappearing, but transforming into something else, something more controlled, more deliberate. And as the truck rolled steadily onward, Danielle Carter did not rush, did not hesitate. She simply moved forward, carrying with her the quiet certainty that what had been set in motion would not be forgotten, not by her, and not by the system that had recorded every second of it. The highway signs began to change as the sky deepened into a muted gold, the kind of late afternoon light that softened everything it touched, but Danielle's focus did not soften with it, her eyes still tracking distance, timing, movement, because for her the road was never just a road. It was a system of variables constantly shifting, and she had learned long ago that the smallest detail could carry the greatest weight. The truck rolled past an exit sign, green and reflective, the numbers flashing by in a second, and she checked the clock on the dash, not out of habit but intention, aligning her position with a mental timeline she had already begun to construct, a sequence that would matter later, when memory alone would not be enough. Her phone remained mounted within reach, the recording saved, silent but present, and for a moment her gaze flicked toward it, not to review, not to doubt, but to confirm that it existed, that the moment had been captured in more than just recollection. The radio stayed low, a distant murmur of voices that rose and fell, without meaning, and Danielle let it remain that way, because she preferred clarity over noise, especially now. She reached toward the small overhead compartment and pulled down a thin logbook, its pages worn from use but meticulously kept, each line filled with careful handwriting that marked miles, times, stops, everything documented with a precision that had nothing to do with regulation and everything to do with control. She flipped to the current page, her hand steady as she picked up a pen from the dash, and without slowing the truck, she wrote a short entry, the ink pressing cleanly into the paper. Unscheduled stop, approximately 13 minutes, no violation stated, and she paused for a fraction of a second before adding, cargo inspected without documentation. The words small, simple, but exact. And when she finished, she closed the book and returned it to its place with the same deliberate care she applied to everything else. The act grounded her, anchored the moment into something fixed, something that could not be reshaped later by memory or interpretation. Outside, the road widened briefly before narrowing again, the lines shifting in a way that required a slight correction of the wheel, and Danielle adjusted smoothly, her hands guiding the truck with quiet authority, the movement almost instinctive, almost invisible. A pickup truck passed her on the left, its engine louder, more aggressive, the driver glancing over for a split second before accelerating ahead, and Danielle did not react, did not follow. She simply maintained her speed, her lane, her direction, because control for her was not about proving anything. It was about consistency. The light continued to fade, shadows stretching longer across the asphalt, and the first hints of evening settled into the air, bringing with it a cooler edge that slipped through the slight crack in her window, carrying the scent of open land and distant trees. Danielle inhaled slowly, the air steadying her further, and for the first time since the stop her shoulders eased more noticeably, not dropping entirely, but releasing enough to signal a shift from immediate awareness to sustained focus. Her mind moved again, not backward this time, but forward, mapping possibilities, outcomes, the next steps that would follow when the road ended and the system began, because she knew this would not stay contained to a stretch of highway. It would move, it would be reviewed, questioned, dissected, and she would be ready for that, not with emotion, not with reaction, but with clarity. The truck passed another mile marker, the number catching briefly in the corner of her eye, and she nodded almost imperceptibly, as if confirming a position only she fully understood. Her fingers tapped once more against the wheel, a quiet rhythm that matched the steady hum beneath her, and she let her gaze settle firmly on the horizon again, the road stretching out in front of her like a line drawn with intention, unbroken, direct. And as the last of the sunlight dipped lower, Danielle Carter continued forward, not faster, not slower, just steady, carrying with her a calm that was not passive but chosen, built from discipline, from experience, from knowing exactly where she stood and exactly what would come next, even if no one else on that road understood it yet. The sky had shifted fully into evening by the time the highway signs began pointing toward a rest area 12 miles ahead, the green reflective letters catching her headlights as the last trace of daylight faded into a deep blue horizon, and Danielle's eyes moved to the sign for just a second before returning forward, her decision already forming without urgency, without hesitation, because she understood the importance of timing not just on the road but beyond it. The truck continued its steady pace, engine low and consistent, and she adjusted her speed slightly, not enough to be noticeable, just enough to align with the upcoming exit, her movements smooth, deliberate, every action grounded in control. The air inside the cab had cooled, the faint breeze through the cracked window carrying a sharper edge now, and she reached up to close it halfway, reducing the noise, narrowing the space around her into something quieter, more contained. Because what came next required focus of a different kind. Her phone remained mounted, the recording still there, untouched, and after a moment she reached toward it again, her fingers tapping the screen with precision as she opened a contacts list, scrolling not quickly but carefully, as if each name carried weight, until she stopped on one and hovered there for a second, her thumb still, her expression unchanged, but her breathing slowed just slightly, deeper, more intentional. The road sign for the exit passed overhead, and she guided the truck onto the ramp, the tires shifting from smooth highway asphalt to a slightly rougher surface. The change subtle but clear, and the curve of the exit required a firmer grip on the wheel, her hands adjusting without thought, muscle memory taking over as the truck followed the arc downward. The rest area appeared ahead, dimly lit by overhead lamps spaced evenly across the lot, casting pools of yellow light onto the pavement. And only a handful of vehicles were parked there, scattered, distant, leaving wide gaps of open space between them, the kind of place where no one paid attention unless they needed to. Danielle eased the truck into a far corner of the lot, away from the other vehicles, aligning it perfectly within the painted lines before bringing it to a smooth stop, the engine idling softly beneath her as she shifted into neutral and engaged the brake with a quiet, mechanical click. For a moment she did nothing, her hands still resting on the wheel, her eyes forward, letting the silence settle fully around her. No wind, no passing traffic, just the faint hum of the engine and the distant buzz of overhead lights. Then she exhaled slowly and reached for her phone again, her thumb pressing the contact she had selected earlier, and she lifted it to her ear as the call connected, each ring measured, each second deliberate. When the line picked up, she did not speak immediately. She let the connection settle, confirming the presence on the other end, and then her voice came, low, steady, unchanged from before. "This is Danielle Carter," she said, and there was a pause, a recognition in the silence that followed, before she continued. "I need to report an incident, and I need it documented properly." Her tone did not rise, did not sharpen. It remained level, controlled, but beneath it there was something unmistakable, something that carried weight beyond the words themselves. She listened as the voice on the other end responded, asking for details, and Danielle's eyes shifted slightly, scanning the empty lot out of habit, confirming once again that she was alone, that the space around her remained undisturbed. Before she began speaking again, Interstate 40, mile marker approximately 1:83, 3 officers initiated a stop without stated cause, conducted a search without a warrant, body cameras active. She paused briefly, allowing the information to land, to be recorded, before adding, "I have my own documentation as well." And there was another pause, longer this time, the kind that indicated understanding, escalation, something moving beyond routine. Danielle lowered her gaze slightly, focusing on nothing in particular, her mind clear, her words measured as she answered each question that followed, providing times, details, observations, everything aligned, everything consistent. And when the conversation reached its natural pause, she ended it with the same calm finality she had carried throughout. "I will be available for follow-up," she said, and then she disconnected the call without lingering. The phone lowered back to its holder, the screen dimming, and Danielle leaned back slightly in her seat, her hands resting loosely now, no longer gripping the wheel, but still grounded, still present. And outside, the rest area remained quiet, unchanged, unaware of the shift that had just taken place within the confines of that cab. The engine continued its low hum, steady, reliable, and after a moment Danielle reached forward and turned it off, the sound fading into complete silence. And in that silence, the weight of what had begun settled fully into place, not heavy, not overwhelming, just certain, and Danielle Carter sat there for a few seconds longer, unmoving, before she reached for the ignition again, ready to continue forward into whatever came next. The engine turned over again with a low, familiar rumble, filling the cab with a steady vibration that grounded everything back into motion. And Danielle sat there for a second longer than necessary, her hands resting lightly on the wheel, her eyes fixed forward through the windshield where the dim lights of the rest area stretched across empty pavement, each one casting a quiet circle of yellow that did not quite touch the next. She did not rush the moment, because she understood something had shifted, not on the road, but beyond it, something already moving through channels she could not see but knew existed. And that kind of movement did not need speed, it needed precision. Her fingers tightened just slightly on the wheel, not from tension but from intention, and she eased the truck forward, the tires rolling slowly at first, then aligning with the exit lane as she guided the vehicle back toward the highway ramp. The motion smooth, controlled, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The night air pressed gently against the cab as she merged back onto the interstate. The flow of traffic thinner now, headlights spaced farther apart, each vehicle passing like a distant thought that did not linger, and Danielle settled into the right lane, her speed consistent, her posture unchanged, but her awareness sharpened in a different way now, not reactive, not defensive, but anticipatory. Her phone remained silent in its mount, the call completed, the report filed, and she did not check it again, did not need confirmation, because she trusted the process she had initiated, the structure that would take over from here, and for a moment she allowed herself a slow breath, deeper than before, her chest rising and falling in a rhythm that matched the road beneath her. The radio crackled again, a faint burst of static followed by voices layered over one another. And this time she raised the volume just enough to catch fragments, not specific words, but tones, shifts, something subtle that hinted at a change in the pattern she had been hearing all day. And she listened, not actively, but with the kind of attention that filtered meaning from noise without effort. A mile marker passed on her right, the number catching briefly in the beam of her headlights before. Adjusted her grip slightly, her fingers settling into a position that felt natural, practiced, and her gaze remained steady, forward, unbroken. The headlights of an oncoming truck flashed briefly across her mirrors as it passed in the opposite direction. A quick burst of light that faded as quickly as it appeared, leaving the road ahead unchanged. And Danielle did not react, did not shift, she simply continued. Her presence on the highway as constant as the lines beneath her tires, somewhere in. Then a call came through clearly, a unit referencing a highway stop earlier in the day. The coordinates not exact but close enough to register, and Danielle's eyes flicked once to the side mirror before returning forward, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady. She did not react outwardly, did not change her pace, but her awareness sharpened further, narrowing slightly as she listened, because she understood that information moved in layers, and what surfaced on an open channel was only a fraction of what was already circulating beneath it. The voice on the radio shifted again. Another unit responding, tone measured, controlled, and there was a pause that stretched just long enough to signal something being considered, something not routine, and Danielle reached over and lowered the volume again, not cutting it off completely, just enough to push it back into the background where it could be monitored without distraction. The truck moved smoothly through the interchange, merging lanes and splitting paths unfolding around her in a steady pattern, and she guided the vehicle with quiet precision, her movements small, efficient, her focus unwavering. Headlights passed on either side, some faster, some slower, but none intersecting her path directly, and she maintained her lane, her speed, her direction, because control was not about reacting to every movement around her. It was about staying aligned with her own. Her hand moved once more toward the console, not to retrieve anything this time, but to rest briefly against the surface, her fingers tapping lightly, a rhythm that mirrored the steady hum beneath her, and she let her gaze lift slightly, scanning the road ahead, the exits, the distances, everything falling into place without effort. The interchange began to thin out behind her, the lanes narrowing again into a simpler stretch of highway, and the lights faded back into scattered points along the road, leaving the night open and wide once more. Danielle exhaled slowly, not releasing tension, but settling deeper into focus, and her mind moved forward again, not replaying what she had heard on the radio, but placing it into context, aligning it with everything she had already documented, everything she had already reported, understanding that the response had begun, even if it was not yet visible. The truck passed another mile marker, the number catching briefly in the headlights before disappearing into darkness, and Danielle nodded almost imperceptibly, confirming her position, her progress, her place within the larger sequence unfolding beyond the road. Her phone remained still, silent, but she did not check it, did not need reassurance. Because she trusted the process she had initiated, the chain of actions that would move forward regardless of her immediate presence. The road ahead stretched long and uninterrupted, the horizon a dark line where sky and land met without distinction, and Danielle kept her eyes fixed on it, her posture steady, her hands firm but relaxed on the wheel. The radio murmured quietly in the background, no longer sharp, no longer immediate, but still present, a reminder that the system was moving, adjusting, responding in ways that would take time to fully surface. And as the miles continued to pass beneath her, Danielle Carter did not accelerate, did not slow. She simply maintained her course, carrying with her the quiet certainty that what had begun on that stretch of highway was no longer isolated, and that somewhere beyond the darkness ahead, the consequences were already beginning to take shape. The road had settled into a long, uninterrupted stretch again, the kind that could pull a driver into rhythm without effort. But Danielle did not drift with it. She stayed present, her eyes scanning far ahead where the faint glow of another distant town began to rise against the horizon, small at first, almost like a reflection, but steady enough to mark a shift in environment. Her hands rested firmly on the wheel, not tight, not loose, just balanced, and the steady hum of the engine beneath her felt less like noise now and more like a constant, something reliable in a space where everything else could change without warning. The radio remained low, a quiet thread of voices weaving in and out of static, and she let it continue without adjustment, her attention no longer fixed on it. But still aware, the way someone listens without actively trying to hear. Her phone stayed silent, mounted within reach, the screen dark, and she did not look at it, did not check for updates, because she knew that whatever was moving on the other end would take time, and she had already done what needed to be done. Another mile marker passed, the number catching briefly in the headlights, and Danielle noted it without conscious thought, adding it to the sequence already forming in her mind. Each detail aligning into something structured, something that would not rely on memory alone. The night air outside pressed gently against the cab, cooler now, carrying the faint scent of distant fields and asphalt cooling after a long day. And she adjusted the vents slightly, letting a controlled stream of air circulate inside, keeping the space comfortable, contained. A set of headlights appeared behind her in the mirror, far at first, then slowly closing the distance, and Danielle's eyes tracked them without turning her head, measuring speed, approach, intent. And when the vehicle moved into the left lane and passed without slowing, she let her gaze return forward, the assessment complete, the moment closed. The road ahead dipped slightly, then leveled out, and she adjusted her speed by a few miles per hour, her foot light, responsive, maintaining a steady flow that matched the movement around her without drawing attention. Inside the cab, everything remained as she left it. The black folder tucked away, the logbook closed, the phone quiet, each object in its place, each action already completed, and that order brought a subtle sense of control that extended beyond the physical space. Her mind moved again, not to revisit the stop, not to question it, but to consider the next layer, the part that would unfold when voices became reports, when recordings became evidence, when decisions made in seconds would be examined in detail. And she understood that part would require patience, clarity, and restraint, not force. Her fingers tapped once against the wheel, a small, unconscious rhythm, and she let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing slightly as the tension that had been present earlier shifted into something more focused, more deliberate. The lights of the distant town grew clearer now, individual buildings beginning to take shape, streetlights forming lines that hinted at structure, at movement beyond the highway. And Danielle watched them for a moment before returning her gaze to the lane ahead, her focus unbroken. The radio crackled once more. A brief spike of static followed by a voice that mentioned a supervisor, the tone measured, controlled, and Danielle did not react outwardly. But the words settled into her awareness, another piece aligning with the rest, another indication that what had started earlier was continuing to move forward. She reached once toward the console, not to retrieve anything, but to rest her hand there briefly, her fingers brushing the edge of the surface before returning to the wheel, the motion grounding, familiar. The truck continued forward, mile after mile slipping beneath her, the road steady, the night deepening, and Danielle Carter remained exactly as she had been since the moment the lights first appeared behind her, calm, controlled, aware, but now there was something else layered beneath it, something quieter, something that carried the weight of certainty, because she knew that she had not just moved through an event, she had set something in motion, and whatever came next would not be decided on the side of a road, but in a place where every detail mattered, every second counted, and Every action had a consequence that could not be undone. The town lights grew closer, resolving into clear lines of streets and storefronts as Danielle guided the truck off the highway onto a service road that ran parallel to a row of late-night businesses, their signs glowing softly against the dark, and she eased her speed down without drawing attention, her movements as controlled as ever, the transition from open road to structured streets unfolding smoothly beneath her hands. The engine settled into a lower hum as she approached a truck stop at the edge of town, the wide entrance marked by tall lamps casting bright circles of light across rows of parked trailers, and she turned in with quiet precision, aligning the truck with an open space near the back where fewer drivers gathered, a place where the noise dropped off and the activity thinned. She brought the vehicle to a complete stop, the brake engaging with a soft mechanical click, and for a moment she sat there again, hands resting on the wheel, her eyes forward, letting the shift in environment settle. The open highway replaced by stillness and low conversation drifting faintly from distant corners of the lot. The engine idled for a few seconds before she turned it off, the vibration fading into silence that felt heavier here, contained by the rows of trucks and the hum of overhead lights. Danielle reached for her phone, lifting it from the mount, and the screen lit her face briefly as she unlocked it, her thumb moving with deliberate intent as she opened a secure application, one that did not carry the simplicity of the recording app she had used earlier, but something more structured, more controlled, and she paused for a second before uploading the file she had recorded, watching the progress bar move steadily across the screen. She did not rush it, did not look away, because she understood the importance of this step, the transition from personal record to formal submission, the moment where what she knew became something others would have to see, to hear, to respond to. The upload completed with a quiet notification, and Danielle set the phone down on the console for a brief second before picking it up again. Opening another thread, this one marked with fewer names, but more weight, and she typed a short message, each word measured, precise. Incident logged, documentation submitted, awaiting confirmation. She read it once, not to correct, but to confirm, and then she sent it, the message leaving her device and moving into a network she trusted without question. Outside, a truck engine started somewhere across the lot, the low rumble carrying through the still air before fading again, and Danielle glanced toward the windshield, her eyes scanning the space automatically, noting movement, noting stillness, everything in balance. She reached down and pulled the black folder back into her lap one more time, opening it fully this time, the pages inside catching the overhead light, and she flipped to a specific section, her fingers stopping on a page that held more than just documentation, something that carried authority beyond the roadside, beyond the system she had just engaged, and for a brief second her gaze lingered there, not with hesitation, but with recognition, before she closed the folder again and placed it back where it belonged. Her shoulders relaxed slightly as she leaned back into the seat, the tension that had been present earlier now fully transformed into something steady, something grounded, and she let out a slow breath, her eyes closing for just a second before opening again, clear, focused. The phone vibrated softly against the console, a single notification, and Danielle picked it up immediately, her gaze steady as she read the message that appeared, a confirmation, brief but unmistakable, indicating that what she had submitted was not only received but already being processed at a level beyond routine. And she did not smile, did not react outwardly. She simply acknowledged it with a small nod, placing the phone back down with the same care she applied to everything else. The truck stop remained quiet around her. The night settled fully now, and Danielle Carter sat there for a moment longer, not waiting, not uncertain, but ready, because she knew that the next part would not unfold on a road or in a parking lot. It would unfold in a place where every detail mattered, where every action would be examined, and where the calm she carried now would become the difference between being heard and being dismissed. And as she reached for the door handle, preparing to step out into the still night air, she carried with her the same steady certainty that had guided her from the moment the lights first appeared, unchanged, unshaken, and completely in control of what came next. The night air met Danielle the moment she stepped down from the cab, cool and still, carrying the faint hum of distant engines and the low buzz of overhead lights that cast long shadows across the truck stop. And for a second, she just stood there beside her rig, boots planted firmly on the pavement, her hand resting lightly against the metal door as if grounding herself in something solid after everything that had unfolded. She did not rush, did not move with urgency, because nothing about this moment required speed. It required presence, and she had mastered that long before this road, long before this night. Her eyes moved across the lot, scanning without appearing to, noting the spacing of vehicles, the quiet figures moving near the building, the stillness in the far corners where no one lingered. And once she was satisfied, she stepped away from the truck, closing the door behind her with a soft, controlled sound that blended into the background. The gravel beneath her boots shifted slightly as she walked, each step measured, steady, and she moved toward the edge of the lot where the light faded just enough to create a boundary between visibility and shadow, not to hide, but to stand where she could see without being the center of attention. Her phone remained in her hand now, the screen dark but ready, and she did not check it, did not open it again, because she already knew what it would show, the confirmation she had received, the process already moving forward, the chain of events no longer dependent on her next action. A truck engine rumbled to life somewhere behind her, headlights flicking on and cutting across the lot in a brief sweep of light that passed over her and moved on. And Danielle did not react, her posture unchanged, her breathing slow and even. She tilted her head slightly upward, her gaze lifting toward the open sky where only a few scattered stars managed to break through the faint glow of town lights. And for a moment, she let that stillness settle, the kind that existed beyond noise, beyond motion, beyond the immediate. Her hand shifted, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of her jacket, and there was a brief pause, almost imperceptible, before she reached inside and pulled out the laminated card she had only glanced at earlier, holding it between her fingers under the dim light, its surface catching just enough reflection to make the details visible to her and no one else. She looked at it for a second, not to remind herself of what it was, but to acknowledge it, the part of her that did not belong to the road, that did not belong to the role she carried here. And then she slid it back into place with the same quiet care, her expression unchanged, her focus steady. Behind her, the truck stood silent now, engine off, lights dim, just another vehicle in a line of many, and yet it carried everything she needed, everything she had used, everything that had set this entire sequence in motion. Danielle turned slightly, her gaze moving once more across the lot, the building, the distant road beyond, and then back to her truck, her mind already aligning with what would come next, not in steps or plans, but in understanding, the kind that did not require explanation. The system would move, the recordings would be reviewed, the reports would be written, and somewhere in that process, the moment on that stretch of highway would be seen for exactly what it was, not as an isolated event, not as a misunderstanding, but as a choice made under the assumption that no one would challenge it. She exhaled slowly, the breath visible only in the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders. And then she turned back toward the truck, her steps just as steady as before, her presence unchanged, grounded. As she reached the cab, her hand resting once again on the handle, she paused for a fraction of a second, her gaze forward, not looking at anything specific, just holding the space between what had been and what was coming. And then she pulled the door open and climbed back inside, the interior welcoming her with its familiar quiet. She settled into the seat, her hands finding the wheel without thought. And for a moment she simply sat there, the stillness complete, the world outside continuing without her. And then she turned the key, the engine coming to life once more, steady, reliable. And as the truck eased forward, rolling out of the lot and back toward the road, Danielle Carter did not look back, because she knew that she had not needed to raise her voice. She had not needed to fight. She had only needed to stand, to see, to act with clarity. And in doing so, she had shifted. Something far beyond that moment. Something that would carry forward long after the lights had faded, long after the road had gone quiet. Something that did not change the world all at once, but changed it enough. One decision, one truth, one steady presence at a time.